Hello, welcome or welcome back to Pets 101. I'm your host as always, Nick, and in this case, this is going to be a little bit of a caveat. As always, I do a disclaimer saying that I am not an expert. I just worked at a pet store for about 10 years, and you definitely would want to research a lot more before considering a particular pet that I recommend, in this case especially. So this time I'm not going to be Parakeets 101, it's going to be Parakeets frequently asked questions. And the reason for that is because I've never technically owned a parakeet myself. So this is all information that I'm going to be gleaning through my experiences, through other people's comments. So this is definitely just scraping the surface of owning a bird, in this case, parakeets in particular. I feel like birds have far different personalities when it comes from species to species, so I definitely do want to, instead of just doing a general overall birds 101, the most common bird that you're going to find in any pet store is going to be a parakeet, and so let's just focus specifically on them. I will definitely be able to open your eyes up to a little bit about them, but I definitely feel like there's going to be some stuff I'm going to miss. Now, I do plan in future episodes to come back and revisit, so keep an eye out for Parakeets 2.0. Hopefully, I'll have a guest that knows a little bit more than me that can shed some light on what I managed to miss in this episode. But I can definitely tell you enough to know a little bit about what you're getting into in case you just thought that it was going to be get a bird, get a cage, and then be done with it. So, as always, my recommendation is to set up the habitat before getting the animal. A lot of people love to get the habitat and the animal in the same place. If you've seen any of my other episodes, you know that this is me being a broken record, but I definitely feel it's very important, especially because most of the time an animal will come just in a tight little cardboard box. So they're getting bumped around, they're in the dark, they're scared, they're stressed, they don't know what's going on. And now you're going to spend the half an hour plus in order to set up their habitat before they can even get let out. Just seems a little cruel. So definitely, recommend getting the habitat first. So, what does the habitat entail? Well, first of all, most of the stores that sell, say, a parakeet-sized habitat, that's going to be, in my opinion and many bird owners' opinions, too small of a habitat, especially if you want to get the parakeet a companion, which is recommended. They are a social animal. So you can have one by itself, but they do well in groups, and that is something that you're going to have to decide for yourself. But I definitely recommend that you get a bigger sized cage than what a store would recommend. That's usually the bare minimum size. And so what I'm saying in this case is that if you're going to get two parakeets, get at least a conure-sized habitat as far as what the packaging on the outside of the box says. You know, maybe even a parrot-sized. And that's just going to be plenty of room for them to be able to, have plenty of toys to play with. In a lot of cases, you have the requirements for a good habitat. So, obviously you would have whatever you're going to be having at the bottom. So, in some cases, for instance, in quite a few pet stores, I've noticed that the bottom literally just has some substrate, like crumpled bedding paper that they can actually rummage around in. And the reason for that is actually because most of the pet stores that had grates at one point, it'd be such a big habitat that it would be two grates fitted together, and that little gap in between, sometimes they would get their toenails stuck, between the grates. They get stressed out, and in order to prevent that from happening and having a customer discover that, they decided to just get rid of the grate entirely and just have the substrate on the bottom. Now that's debatable on whether that's good or not. Obviously, the reason why we have grates in the first place is that when they do just poop willy nilly, which they will, that it ideally most of it falls between the grates onto whatever you lay down to catch it underneath. Oftentimes that's just paper, and then that way when it comes time to clean the habitat, which please do. That's cleaning it is such a chore, but it is an often neglected chore put off to the wayside when life happens. But you got to feel like, well, if you don't want to have an animal get sick and then potentially pay a lot of vet bills, you're gonna have to be doing a lot of cleaning. So if you do use the grate, then you're obviously going to have to double your cleaning time because you're going to have to clean up the stuff underneath and also the grate itself. And it is what it is. So that's the bottom. You have the two options, and if it's a grate that's fitted for the habitat, then you're not going to have the issue that you do in some pet stores where there's two ones that meet, and then there's going to be potential for them getting their claws caught. While I'm on the subject, this is an animal that might require maintenance. for instance, trimming the wings if you don't want it to have the potential chance of escaping, but also the toenails. Now they do make perches and stuff that are made of coarse, gritty, sandy stuff that'll help naturally trim them a little bit, but you don't want them to get their nails to get so long that it is getting caught in grates, or that it prevents them from being able to perch or grip onto the sides of the cage. So nail trimming, wing trimming, and unfortunately, you might even need to do some beak trimming. Now, I'm jumping ahead, but that's something that, unless you're an expert or at least experienced in doing, that is something that you're probably gonna have to take it to a vet for, and it's gonna be a pretty big bill for something that's just a little bit of maintenance. So just keep that in mind. There are ways to prevent it, and I'll get back to that in a second. But just think about the fact that you're not just going to need to do a vet bill if they're not feeling well, which with parakeets, and I think some birds in general, but social birds, if they are feeling ill, they're not going to show it right away because they're a sociable creature, which means that the whole rest of the group is going to kick them out if they sense that one of them is sick, because they don't want the whole group to get sick. So they're really good at hiding it. Like they're actually going to be pretty far into their illness by the time you might notice it. So just keep that in mind. But so back to the habitat. So you want to have the bottom, the substrate. You want to figure out what's going to happen with their poop. You definitely want to have stuff for them to perch on, stuff for them to climb. So ladders, poles, and you want them to be of varying size. And the reason for that is that if they only have the same shape all the time, their muscles can actually atrophy. They might actually get the chance to not be able to grip if it's always the same circumference every time. So you want to have varying circumferences. Oftentimes it's not a bad idea to have it be rough, not only for ease of perch, but also to help kind of trim their nails down naturally when they're on those perches. So you have that. Water source, of course. Now, arguably, you could have there be two water sources. So one would be a silo. So that's a tall, skinny tube where all they can do is just drink the water out of a very narrow opening, and then you could have a separate one for their bath water. Now you could use the bath water for both the drinking and bathing water, but that means that you need to be vigilant about switching that out because they are cleaning off their dust, debris, and occasionally pooping in that water. So you don't want them also drinking that source of water. So the water source is going to be up to you. If it is going to be a single source of water, frequent water changes. I mean, that's already going to be recommended, but it's even more so important to their health if they're using it for both. So you can have a separate silo, separate bathing, or combine the two, and then just do frequent changes. Their food as well. Now, this is going to be a very common subject about a lot of animals that I talk about, but just their food alone oftentimes isn't quite enough. It's usually recommended to supplement with some fresh veggies. Now, with parakeets, they're a weird bunch. So, like some other animals that I talk about, they don't have the taste buds for capsaicin, which means that if you, say, cut up a green pepper in order to either use for your own food or for them, and normally you would just throw away that big bit of a bell pepper that has all the seeds on it, don't do that. Give it to the parakeets. They absolutely love it. They think it's the best thing. Those seeds are going to be gone in a very short amount of time, and you'd think, oh my god, isn't their mouth going to be burning? No, they actually don't taste that. To them, it just tastes like a fresh veggie. So some of the stuff that they like, I believe, off the top of my head, again, look this up before you actually give it to them, but they like the bell pepper seeds. They enjoy zucchini, broccoli. I'm probably forgetting a couple, but those are three major common ones that we often will give them. And it's just good to supplement because it's pretty much impossible for any of these animals that you feed that typically would have veggies in their diet for them to get a prepackaged dried food that would have the same nutritional impact as a freshly cut up vegetable. So it's always recommended to do that. In the case of our store, we would do that 3 times a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we would give them a little extra something. And keep in mind that I don't know how good the nutritional value of a strawberry is, but most birds love it. But then you're also going to see a red massacre all over the habitat. So because we all, in certain pet stores, up until the point of you purchasing the animal, we will trim their wings in order to keep them from escaping. And if you do trim the wings, again, I'm going back to the reason why you might want a professional do it if you're not sure what you're doing, is because they have what's called a blood feather. And if you trim that one accidentally, it will spray blood, and it's not going to be a pretty sight. And they should probably, hopefully, be okay, but it's still something where you see similar splatter patterns if they eat strawberries as if you accidentally cut a blood feather. So if you've recently trimmed their wings and you also gave them strawberries, you might have a bit of a panic and be looking around for the one that might be bleeding when it's actually just leftover strawberries. So keep that in mind. Something else that they do enjoy eating is millet. So millet is definitely just a treat. It is not really anything that's super nutritional, but it is something that they very much enjoy. Now, they enjoy it to the point where if you just take a spray of millet, just a little bunch, and you just throw it on the ground, they're gonna, jump all over it, poop all over it, and clean it up relatively quickly. So it's usually recommended that you hang the millet in a hard to reach area so that they have to kind of jump over, climb over, and then peck at it, fall back to the ground, repeat the process. Millet's definitely a treat. You can definitely have it stretch out your millet dollar, have it go a longer way by having them not just be able to eat it right off of the ground. Again, it's not recommended for sanitary purposes. It's not recommended for it to last any length of time. One important one, I feel, is cuttlebone. So getting back to what I was talking about with having to trim their beak, ideally this should never have to happen because they should hopefully be eating enough hard foods and shaving their beak down with cuttlebone so that they should never have to get their beaks trimmed. Because if they do, it's not good. If the person that you take them to doesn't know what they're doing, they might not either do it correctly, do it too much, and much like a nail that has a quick in it, a beak can actually have a membrane in it, and you don't want to cut it too much. So ideally they should be able to take care of it on their own, but you need to give them something to pare it down with. With hamsters, guinea pigs, that would be a block of wood. In the case of the parakeets, it's cuttlebone. So I believe what it is, it's literally just pulverized and then reformed fish bone that is then put in like a little oval, and again you hang it up somewhere so that it's not just sitting on the ground, and they kind of shave off their beak with that, and ideally they can take care of that themselves. But just so you have a heads up, that might be something you have to deal with later on down the road, depending on the bird, depending on individual results may vary, basically. And that's going to be a main theme running throughout these episodes, is that I could tell you all of the standard rules on the planet, and then it turns out that yours does nothing of the sort, and it is completely different from anything that I told you, and that's just how it goes. I talked about aquatics in a previous episode, and hey, who knows, maybe the aquarium that you have, it's all community fish, and you got a bully in there anyway. That just might be how it is with parakeets. So they're supposed to be a sociable bird, but you also definitely want to check after you introduce a new one, because you might have a bully, you might have one that's picking on the other one for whatever reason, but for the most part they should be good to go with each other. Now, on that subject, there's a lot of people that ask me how to sex a parakeet. And that's not a vulgar term. Sexing is literally just being able to tell if it's a boy or a girl. Now, unfortunately, unless you're a professional veterinarian or something, there's some guidelines that you might be able to tell, but for the most part, there's not 100% certainty. So, ideally, a boy parakeet will have blue on the nares. Now, what the nares are is, if you know where the beak matches the face, and then there's that little bump, and then there's the breathing holes. That's called the nares. And that strip that has the two holes in it usually starts off a white, kind of sometimes pinkish color, and if it's a boy, as they get older, that's supposed to turn blue. So that's not necessarily a guarantee that you have a boy or a girl, because girls start off without any boys and girls both start off without any blue on the top. So if it's a fresh batch of parakeets, neither is going to have any blue. And I don't think that it's technically a guarantee that a boy is going to get blue in the nares over the course of time. So if you're trying to have an all-boy or all-girl flock, there's not a guarantee from the pet store that that is in fact what you got. So you do always have typically any store that I've ever heard about is a 30-day return policy. So you might be able to get the bird, get it checked out, find out that it's not the sex that you're looking for, and then bring it back. I haven't seen too many repercussions in having boys versus girls. Again, this is why it's going to be more of a frequently asked questions thing. I'm sure that there's probably people screaming at the screen that are like, oh, no, if you have a boy and a girl, they're absolutely going to have an egg together. They're absolutely going to be some issue, some whatever. Again, I've dealt with, communities of like, 8 to 10 or more, and quite often there's probably definitely males and females mixed in together, and never really had an issue. Maybe the occasional egg gets dropped, but that is a very rare occurrence in my experience. That's probably something that is different later on in life, but there it is. So I digress. Getting back to the habitats. So, you talked about the perches, the food, the water, the snacks, but, the beak trimming. But, something that is super important is toys. So I'm going to very briefly diverge to the point where there's zoos that have, like, say, bobcats and, wild animals and stuff. And so there was usually a huge issue when it came to the animal being moody, reclusive, attacking the people that work at the zoo. And they just did the simplest thing where they would get these boxes with lot of puzzles inside of them and stuff, and give that for the bobcat to go ham on, and it vastly improved their mood. The amount of incidents with them having emotional issues was severely reduced. They were just bored. They get fed already dead meat, and so they have nothing to hunt, and that's 90% of their character is hunting. So you give them something, a toy to hunt, quote unquote, and it makes their mood so much better. Well, it's the same with birds. Birds are very intelligent and curious and playful by nature. And so if you have just a boring old habitat with nothing for them to swing from and look at and play with and move around and peck at, then you're going to have a very, sad and stressed out bird. Now, one of the signs of stress for a bird, not to get too graphic, I mean, this is an adult channel, but they will actually start pulling their own feathers out of their body, which is just painful and horrific looking. I've seen so many real rehabilitation pictures and stuff where it shows the bird looking like somebody took its clothes off, because it had actually pecked itself to be completely nude. And thankfully, most of the feathers will regrow if it's rescued and rehabilitated in time. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes the feathers won't grow back if it's been a long enough stress time. So you definitely want to keep them mentally engaged as well as physically healthy. That's true of pretty much any animal that you own. Some of them are simple creatures, so a lot of like, say, for instance, mice. For the most part, if you have the food and the chew blocks and everything, just a simple wheel is really what they need to be able to keep their physical and mental health up. With birds, though, they enjoy seeing mirrors because it looks like another bird, and they can kind of figure out that it's not a real bird, but it's still something to be able to look at. They enjoy seeing that stuff. They enjoy stuff that they can pull around and mess around and manipulate. So give them as much of that stuff as possible. They love stuff that they can hang and swing from. When the parakeets in my store, they actually love to get. There's a metal grate that's on the top of the habitat. They actually like to climb up whatever we gave them to climb until they can get to the top, and then hang 100% upside down. So their feet are on the grate, their heads are hanging down, and then they're just keeping an eye on everything from a completely upside down point of view. It's something I used to love to do as a kid. I used to love hanging my head over the side of the bed and see the whole world upside down and feel like I discovered something amazing, where it's just like, did you know you could look at it this way? Now look, the floor is the ceiling is the floor. It's amazing. And so that seems to be a favorite thing for them to do as well. And it's just a blast to watch them play around. Preening each other is, adorable, but watching them playing with a new toy is just fun for both you and the bird. So why wouldn't you do it? Do it. Go ahead, do it, Oftentimes there will be one that's not selling so well that might go on clearance. So just, maybe just stick around to getting the ones that are on clearance. I don't know how you want to do it, but I feel like that is just almost as important as getting cuddle, bone, feed, and, water for them, is something to mentally stimulate them. Because, again, they are definitely more intelligent than, say, your average animal. So along those lines, this is where my ignorance is going to start to show, because I've actually heard done tell that they can actually learn words. Now, I've obviously only ever seen parakeets in the adolescent phase, so I actually saw one crazy bit of literature that said that they can learn the most words, like even more than parrots, which seems crazy to me. But apparently, I don't know if there's a difference between the ones that are found in a pet store versus ones that are raised in the wild, or vice versa, but they're apparently not outside of the realm of potential of learning words, which I don't know if that means they could say them. I don't know if that just means that they can learn multiple words to mean multiple different things. I know that there's pet stores that'll sell, like, finches and stuff that they're never going to learn a word. They're just literally going to be birds to fly around and be arguably a little bit more difficult to take care of because all they're going to be is just flighty birds going back and forth. But the parakeet, apparently they are very intelligent and they can get hand tame. Now the problem is that most pet stores, you're not going to get one that's already hand tame right out of the bat. So if you were to say get a ferret, most of them are already hand tame. Even if you were to get a different type of bird, like for instance a conure, most of those are hand fed before they get to the pet store. So those are going to be hand tame. But for the most part, a parakeet, we just get them as a batch, and they're not going to be hand tame. In fact, I don't want to deter you from getting one that's already hand tame at the pet store, but if you open up the habitat at the store and you hold your hand out and the parakeet is curious and actually just jumps onto your finger, that means one of two things. That means it's either been there for so long that it's naturally gotten hand friendly, which if the store isn't actively trying to do that, that means it's been there for a while. So it's probably older than you realize. Or it's one that has been returned by a customer. And that might cause some other emotional problems where it might have already bonded with the past customer. They relinquished them or returned them within the 30 days. And now they might have a little bit of trust issues. So even though they jumped on your finger, they might not know exactly what's going on. And so that's just something to consider as well. Much like it would be if you were to get a dog or a cat or any other animal that's had a questionable past. It's just something to look out for. And in an ironic way, having a super friendly parakeet right out of the pet store might actually be a warning sign. And again, I never want to discourage anyone from ever getting any pet, especially ones that have had some stuff happen to them in the past, which is why I can't believe I didn't do this at the beginning of the episode, but I always recommend adopting first. Oftentimes it's cheaper because much like many animals, when you first get them, you don't realize just what a big hit the first purchase is when you're getting all of the stuff that you need to be able to take care of them in one fell swoop. That wasn't a bird pun, but I'm going to take it. I'll use it anyway, and we're keeping it in. So you're going to need, a lot of stuff, and you also might not know a little bit of the past of the bird. So if you can adopt out, and might not only get some free habitat stuff, you might also be able to get to know a little bit about the bird's personality before you even get a chance to be the new pet parent, hopefully the forever home. So, excuse me. So with them, again, they are going to be definitely a very unique personality. And the first couple of weeks, I mean, it just depends on your skill level and your comfort level and how often you can try it. But they're probably not going to jump onto your finger the first bit that you have them. I hate to say it. And I assume this is true of parakeets as it is of pretty much any other animal that I've talked about before in the past. But I'm probably pretty sure that if you are going to get them, bring them home, that for the first day or so, let them adjust. Don't try and start playing with them the second that you get them home. Much like a video game, that's the first thing you want to do when you bring one home, but it's actually the opposite of what you should do. Let them get adjusted to the sights, to the smells, to the sounds. I mean, do you have another animal in there that might be harassing them? Not just cats. Most people are like, okay, well, we'll make sure that the cat can't have access to them. Most dogs are very fascinated with the parakeets and will oftentimes try and jump up to the cage if you're not paying attention to what's going on. So don't just think because you don't have a cat in the house that you're not going to have another animal in the house that might try to harass them. So just things to think about when it comes to that. But from what I understand, having a bird is super awesome. So I definitely don't want to discourage you from having that. I just want you to be as informed as possible. So real quick, getting on with the maintenance of the bird. So you can, if you do your research, watch some videos, besides just this one, you can trim them yourselves. And from what I understand, it's relatively pretty easy. If you spread up their wing, the under feathers that are closest to their armpit, to their elbow, are usually going to be a short enough length. And then if you could just continue that length up the rest of the arm, oftentimes you won't hit the blood feather. Again, don't take this as writ and then give me some nasty comments saying, hey, you said that I wouldn't hit the blood feather and I'm hitting the blood feather. So I don't know what's going to happen. So, at your own risk. It's the same deal with the claws. So the claws, just like any other claw, just like a dog, just like a cat, they will have a quick. That'll be kind of like with the fingernail. You'll have the pink and the fingernail, and then once it gets to a certain point, it's going to start turning white, and that's where you know it's safe to trim. It's the same thing with birds and cats and dogs. Luckily with parakeets, they don't have often, most birds don't have black talons, so you can usually see, pretty close to where the pink is. Just make sure to cut a little bit before that, and then you're good to go. A little bit after that, sorry. Oh my goodness. But again, so if you get it from a pet store, They might be doing the nail trims and the wing trims while that's the pet store's pet. As soon as you get them, then unfortunately, no, the pet store cannot do that for you. You are going to have to take it to a professional, not the pet store. And it seems frustrating, but it's a liability issue. It's tough when you're on both sides of the fence, where you see where the store's coming from and you see where the customer's coming from. Where it's like, well, that that person was perfectly fine with trimming the wings and the nails while it was their bird. So why can't I just take the bird back to you? It's just the whole thing. Just know ahead of time that's what's probably going to be going down. Is that you're going to be like, well, who's going to take care of this beak and wings and feet? Not you? No, not us. Not the store. So that it is what it is. So anyway, so going back to them and their health issues real quick, because that's definitely an important one that maybe I'm just going to sign off with, because it's so difficult to tell. It really is. So some of the signs that you may or may not see are going to be if their feathers are ruffled up, if they are separated from the group, if you have more than one, if they seem to be breathing a little heavy, which is tough because birds naturally breathe at an accelerated rate. So being able to tell that it's just a little off is a bit difficult. Their eyes should always be wide open and clear, much like any other animals. If they're, a little half-lidded, even if they're not sleeping, that's definitely something to look for. But as always, what it seems to be with so many animals is their vent. So the hole that extrudes that dispenses of the waste, affectionately recalled to as a vent, so that you just don't have to say butthole. But the vent on a bird, much like most other animals, should always be clean as a whistle. You should not be able to see anything around it. So if there's wet feathers, any poop cake to it, anything like that, that is usually a good indication that the bird is not feeling well. And so, unfortunately, with parakeets, they could just not exhibit any signs, not exhibit any signs. Oh my God, they're exhibiting signs. Oh my God, they're belly up. Or actually, in this case, yeah, belly up, on their back, legs in the air. No longer with us, is I guess what I'm trying to politely say. So, if you do manage to see any signs of illness, that's something you should definitely address right away and not sit on it and hopefully that they're going to pull through. Because if it's bad enough that you're noticing the signs, that means that it's probably progressed to a point where they need immediate medical attention. Now, most pet stores, if they're good, if this is something that happens within the first 30 days, the store will buy back the bird from you, take it to the vet for you, deal with the treatment and the medical bills, and then sell it back to you. You will not be able to take the bird to the vet and then have the store, compensate you afterwards. They need to buy it back from you so that it's technically their bird. Then they can take it to the vet and then deal with all that stuff. Outside of the 30-day window, unfortunately, it is usually going to be something that's your expense. And the more exotic of a bird that you get, the more the expensive vet bill is usually going to be. So oftentimes there's just a flat out fee for anything that's considered exotic. And that is even including a guinea pig, which you think is probably one of the most common creatures in the world. And yet they still consider it an exotic pet. Anything that's not a dog or a cat is oftentimes considered exotic, especially birds. And so just keep that in mind, that this is not a bird that is, even though initially cheap enough, I think usually within the $20 to $30 range when it comes to a parakeet, it's not going to be a cheap vet bill by far. So preventative is always the best way to keep the health up. So definitely give them as much healthy and fresh and food as possible, as clean of water as possible. Keep that habitat cleaned, and ideally you should have an awesome companion that makes some great background noise, and apparently, if my research is correct, the occasional word or two. So that's that for parakeets. I might get into it later on about other breeds of bird, because it just gets cooler as you go along. I mean, even though I never was much of a bird person, which is why, again, this is going to be a slightly less informed episode for pets, but I actually have fallen in love with a couple of conures in my life. One kayik, especially, that I remember. The more expensive the bird, the more cool personality traits they might have, and I've definitely bonded with a couple. But just that's something to keep in mind, that I don't believe parakeets are as strict about which person they're going to have for their pet parent. But when you get into the world of birds, make sure that you're planning on having them forever, that you're not going to plan on moving to an apartment that might or may not allow a pet, bird, because some of these birds, I don't think parakeets specifically, but some birds do bond with the human for life, and if they get displaced and they're not with that human anymore, that can be a huge stressor and lead to the pulling out of feathers and stuff that I mentioned earlier. So that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes the pets love us just as much as we love them, and just to get them on a whim as an impulse buy drives anybody that's ever worked at a pet store insane, because it affects the pet often a lot more than you ever realize, and it's something that, again, I don't believe parakeets technically fall in that category, but again, don't take my word for it. Do your research, and if you do decide that you do want to have a parakeet as a forever home, then awesome, and join the club, and maybe let me know some of the stuff I might have gotten wrong, and maybe some of the words that they learned along the way.